All right, welcome back to another episode of Getting Past the Premium, everybody. I'm excited to have with me today Chris Cline. Chris is the executive director for the Agents Council for Technology. Chris, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah. Well, I mean, other than a gloomy day here in Central Ohio, but
Uh,
it's par for the course in the
yeah,
middle of January. So no
same way
biggies.
here
Yeah.
in Omaha. So,
Omaha.
at
Yeah.
least we're in positive and double-digit temperatures because we haven't been there for the last couple of weeks.
All right. Yeah, we'll take that. I was on a call with somebody earlier this morning who was calling from Italy, and it's like 60 over there. And I completely it completely exposed my level of geographic acumen because I was like, would have thought it might have been comparable weather to here, but
Yeah.
I guess I need to get out the globe.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. Well, for everybody listening that I'm sure a lot of people know who you are, but for everybody that may not, you want to kind of talk about what you do today and then also your background.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And it's awesome to meet new folks and to have
Yeah.
an opportunity to just have these great conversations. So kudos to you for forming this podcast and
Oh, thank you.
giving
Been
everybody a
fun.
voice and bringing people out and having, different conversations with different people across the industry. But yeah, so today and as of about 20 months ago, I became the executive director of the Agents Council for Technology, which is one of the programs at the National Big I, and really big shoes to fill as Ron Berg retired.
Yeah.
And he did a really nice job over a fairly lengthy amount of time trying to convince me that I was at least one of the folks that could
Yeah.
take what he had inherited and been building with the team there. And so it took me like 5 or 6 months to make that decision, but it's been great, to join. We're a small team. Jenny Winkworth's my partner in crime at ACT, and really just trying to create um, more awareness of what we're doing and
Hmm.
even think differently about what we're doing and how a small but mighty team can learn more about technology and to give more insights and thought leadership to help independent agencies and really the channel at large leverage technology to bring their unique strategies to life. Sounds great on paper. It's a nice bullet point. But as you know, it's a heavier lift. Fortunately, there's a lot of people focused in this space, and
Yeah.
love to think that the tide can raise all ships and figure things out. But not everybody shares the same opinion on what tech and how tech and which
Oh, yeah.
tech and what, all those kind of things. But it's a great conversations every single day about that. But prior to joining ACT, I had spent 28 years on the carrier side
Okay. Yeah.
and just had it's just a phenomenal number of opportunities to do very cool things there. But I mean, a super condensed version of even where that began. So I'm an art major. I went to school to be a
Mhm.
graphic designer, a fine arts degree, um, and
That's what the
joined
insurance
that.
industry is made up of.
Yeah, I
Nobody
mean, it was very
expects to get
natural.
into it.
Well, I mean, how many people in our industry have said that, it's the cliche that people didn't find the industry found them. But
Yep.
started off as an internship, had a faculty advisor in college who said, hey, there's a guy who runs a graphics department at insurance carrier down the road, and he's a part-time faculty member in the evenings, and the long story short, but did that and then kind of just made my way through, did a lot of different things: sales, underwriting, compliance, employee training, marketing, and big chunk of time leading agency distribution, or a big chunk of the functions in agency distribution. And along the way fell in love with independent agents and what
Yeah.
they do and what makes them unique. And another, super cheesy cliche is, I feel like I was an entrepreneur stuck in a conservative person's body, and just could spend all day long talking in independent agencies about how everybody kind of has the same couple of goals, but beyond that, there's 40,000 of them. So
Yep.
there's 40,000 ways to think about
Everything's different. Yeah.
effectively running one. And I love that. And so that was part of the draw, to the Big
Yeah.
I, was an opportunity to work, with a group of people who are solely focused on trying to understand the needs and the opportunities presented to agents today, and to work on ways to help them out.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I mean, given that background, I'm sure you've got some unique perspectives on the industry, but echoing one thing there, I agree with you. The things I love about the industry is, you would think, given that we all provide insurance or are the distribution channel for insurance for our clients, that we would do things the same way, right? Because there are a few key steps that have to be done the same way, right? But when you start to dig into how different firms do different things, it's just really fun to see the different applications of how we go about placing insurance on behalf of our clients. So that is fun. It's a fun part about the industry. But I wanted to get your thoughts kind of today. And you sit in an interesting spot being, the executive director at ACT, because, tech is obviously at the forefront of a lot of conversations in the industry right now. Some people look at that as everything's going to be tech driven and done by technology, and taking the human out of the out of the loop, right? And I think there's several people, me included, that believe it's the exact opposite, right? We need to optimize the human in that relationship, and use technology to better support what the person is doing for the client. But where I'm going with this is then internally, one of the things that we don't talk about enough, because I think again, technology gets so much of that bandwidth, right, in conversation, is how do we support those people, right? And, the buzzword out there internally is how do we drive great culture? How do we create the environment people want to come to work towards every day? All of those things. So I wanted to get your perspective on that. What does culture mean to you? And then how do you see that being applied in agencies today?
Yeah, guys, how much time do we have
Yeah.
without boring people? First of all, I will say I align with your line of thinking that I think the best tech is that which enables the
Yeah.
human experience. And by the human experience, I mean, those that offer the products, those that serve the client, and then ultimately the client.
Yep.
Maybe we'll go well past that, but I assume I'll be retired by then. And, all sort of massive sort of societal change has a little bit of a pendulum swing dynamic. We might overcorrect a little bit, and then we normalize here a little bit. So, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But we've seen that, right? It wasn't that many years ago where every insurtech
Yep.
air quotes,
Death
was,
of the independent agent,
yeah, I mean, it was Velcroed to the word disruption. And
Yeah.
now that's just not a thing anymore. And I think most, at least the firms that are having success in our industry, are those that view their role as that of an enabler. And that's fantastic. And so now it's like, well, how do we start sorting through that? But baking all of that together, you kind of ask, what does culture mean to me? I think that's a huge question, and there's a gazillion different answers, and I probably answer it different every single time I have this conversation. But I mean, to me, I think about it through the lens of intentionality,
Mm-hmm.
and what experience an organization truly wants to create for their employees, their customers, and really, I would think any other stakeholder group. And that's a vibe, that's an attitude, that's a set of behaviors. And all of those things feed to what kind of employees you hire and
Yep.
how they're trained to do their job. And ultimately, I think as it relates to the technology side of things, what tools and resources you acquire and deploy and make available for each of those stakeholders to use. And so that's a lot, but there's a lot of places that will say they have a great culture, and then they struggle, I think, to perhaps to define what that means or to put it into words.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's not to dismiss that, because it is really hard to put that into words and to think about the actual behaviors
Yeah.
that bring that to life. But even that, sort of as a nutshell, that's easier than actually making it happen. And, you've read books on execution and strategy versus execution, right? And there's a reason why those exist. And I think if you translate that to this cultural dynamic where it works, whether it's by design or by default, it's where the words and the vision and the mission from those on the top of the organization are clearly articulated. And I always hate to say down through an organization, but I mean, organizations are built
Yep.
on some hierarchy, but at least through an organization where people really have clarity, again, by design or by default, as to what the organization is trying to be,
Yeah.
and actually how to work there so that they fulfill that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. So, there's a lot in there, right? And I think one of the things that leaders struggle with when it comes to culture is it's very intangible, right? Or can be. So how do you recommend, if you're a leader, either growing a firm or maybe you're going into a new role as a leader, or you're just trying to develop the right culture internally for your team? Some of that you can drive through, say, systems and processes, right? Do your mission statement, your values, all of those things, right? Is more of a systematic approach to it. But then there is the intangible side of it, which is building relationships. It's living out your values. It's the behaviors, as you mentioned, right? So how do you what's your recommendation kind of to a business owner, to a leader, as to how can they improve or, design or build the culture that they want, more specifically?
Yeah, I think it starts with that itself. I mean, it's really getting clear on what you want that to be. And
Yeah.
that's actually hard. And depending on the size of the organization, I mean, if you're kind of a middle of the bell curve, and I mean that in size, not in capabilities or sophistication, independent agency out there, you're probably somewhere in the 10 to 25 employee range. Usually there's one or two people that have accountability for ownership of that organization. And then really the buck stops there, which is, not to be harsh, but the name on the door, the people who are in charge of the organization really should be thinking about what it means to show up in the market, and
Yep.
what do you want that experience to be? And I keep using the word experience because it's real. And so I would encourage people to start with words and themes and the mission vision that you talk about, which I think more firms should do. But then what do those really mean? So those words look differently and sound differently than what every other business in town
Yeah.
has, right? And maybe you go back to the original, and then maybe you've seen, I think it was Randy Schwantz wrote The Wedge,
Yeah. Yep.
or that
Yep.
sales book, talks about the ladders of abstraction.
Hmm.
And most companies, when they put, the things that differentiate them on a board, you could probably just use a dry erase and put every other company in town. And it's done for a hyperbolic effect, but it is to force you to go deeper into what makes you unique. Um, and thinking about culture is more than flat screen TVs and laptops and a pool table and a keg for 4 o'clock. I mean, those are cool things, but even without really being clear for your folks and the team, those really can't sustain employee and customer retention, at least in my perspective. And so how you expect to be treated, how you expect your employees to be treated, how you expect people to treat each other, what experience you want for your customers, what do you want people to sort of subconsciously think about your organization when they hear your name or see your logo or encounter one of your teammates in the market. I mean, you can still use words like integrity, trust, and
Absolutely.
great service and all of those kind of things, but putting those and being really clear, and I think being succinct. You can't be 25 things.
Hmm.
What are 3, 4, or
Make
5
it
things that
simple.
you
Yeah.
really want it to be, and be very transparent about why those words, those themes, those expectations matter to you as an owner is really important. And this sounds sort of like direct, but I truly believe that most employees wake up in the morning wanting to do good,
Yep.
and what at the bare minimum, what they hope for when they kind of go into the office or launch a Zoom, whatever, is a pretty clear understanding of what their job is, to have the tools and resources to do it effectively, be coached on how to
Yep.
perform, and get feedback and be fairly compensated.
Hmm.
And
I
so
would agree with that. Yeah.
and I'm kind of going to that point because I think those are areas where I think we as a society, in and out of our industry, have an opportunity to do more when bringing culture to life.
Yeah.
So it's one thing, very important, to define what you think it is, the mission, vision, here's the words, here's even some things that look like behaviors, and to say that. But then how do you start to create an accountability model, regardless of your size, of the size of your company? And I think most everybody is nice and kind, and you assume that people are going to do the right thing. But I've really developed a strong belief that I think cultural components should be in almost every job description.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should be a component of each performance management and coaching and mentoring inside an organization. So start from a spot of noble intent, not punitive results. Okay, here's what we're expecting and here's why. Be very clear on the why. Most people will do about anything if they understand why and they can align to the reasoning,
Yep.
which I think we stop
They'll
short of.
do more or better typically too when they understand the why.
Yeah, what's the benefit? How does it help me individually? Kind of the what's in it for me. How does it help me do my job? How does it help us benefit our customers? How does it benefit the company, right?
Yeah.
Um, our ability to invest in new tools and new tech and new staff and to grow, all those kind of things. So if you have that clear, then if you have like middle level leaders, then they know some of these things and now have the ability to coach their staff or to offer performance feedback. If it's a smaller organization where it's one-to-one, it gives you those tools. And then something to have a consistent basis to evaluate your team, right? It's one thing to talk about the number of widgets you do and how fast you do them and how accurately you do them, but it's the how you do it and the why you do it super important. So stopping there and just to saying that alone, just putting it into job descriptions and just forcing yourself to have that conversation as a leader or a leadership team is hard. And it now makes culture become real. And again, people they'll do what's expected. Most people will. And then to put it in to say, hey, we're going to evaluate against some of these standard set of behaviors that we expect from everybody, regardless of role.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, if people are misaligned and they've had a chance to succeed and you've given the tools, we don't, as a society, do a very good job of asking people with misaligned behaviors to go work somewhere else. Because it's not objective, right? It's squishy.
Yeah.
So I'm stopped there for a second.
Be.
I've rambled, but yeah, I've got some other thoughts. But yeah, I just want to see where you're.
Yeah, no, frankly, I mean, what we find is when you have a strong culture based around everything you just walked through, most people actually self-select out.
Yes,
they
you're right.
realize that this just isn't going to be a fit. Or when you do have to have that conversation, it's not a, hey, you're getting fired conversation. It's a, I don't think this is a fit conversation. And you've done all of the right things to determine whether or not it is a good fit. Like you mentioned, they've had the right coaching, the resources, everything. And, hopefully at that point, if you've done the right, if you've had the right conversations and everything leading up to that, the person, is, yep, they're going to agree with you pretty much. Sometimes it's a relief to them even.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? And look, we all know there's HR laws and there's hiring and firing regulation in every state. So this isn't suggesting in any way, shape,
compliance advice.
Right. And it's not suggesting you ignore those kind of things. But I think most of those still say that you need to document.
Yes.
Document and document and document, and then what's been done to address the behaviors. And I do think you're right. I mean, you've talked to people that have left environments, and sometimes the people that leave will say the environment they left was toxic or it was a bad culture, maybe. But I think the way you said it, Elliot, is appropriate. Like when you have greater clarity about what the culture is, what's expected, and the tools by which people are empowered to do it, then it becomes more an objective conversation. We don't stink and you don't stink. We're just not aligned.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I think, and something where I get deeply passionate about is this addressing misaligned cultural behaviors. We're pretty good as an industry at saying, hey, you've missed your new business target the last 5 years in a row.
The objective stuff, right?
You're gone, right? Your audits, you fail, whatever those kind of things are. But when it's just you're not behaving the way we hope, then a couple things I think become true. at least in pockets of companies, depending on size, is employees are way more astute and observant than,
Mhm.
I mean, we know this, but then we want to give them credit for, I think, in some of this stuff. And so they will be able to see behaviors that don't align. They will see it way before the leader does.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because they're
They're boots
interacting
on the
with this
ground.
stuff.
Yeah, they're there.
And so, and I think most employees, again, I might be naive, tell me if I'm wrong. Most employees believe that the manager or the leader of a team or a company will eventually address stuff that's not healthy. Well, the longer that goes, the greater the level of optics applied to misalign that are shared across people for misaligned behaviors. Things subconsciously start to happen across the employee, the rest of the employees are, well, first of all, they don't think you're sincere about the culture you want.
Yep.
And they
Which
don't
is
believe
a nail in the coffin if you start down that road, because then
it
people don't
totally
trust
is.
you. And yeah, keep going.
Well,
Sorry.
no, that's quite all right. I love it because, and I've kind of authored a couple things and done some presentations under the title of What You Permit, You Allow. And it's a
Yeah.
line out of a 70s tune that I heard years ago. But the idea is, if this person or people who are misaligned, and now you've got some objectivity to it, the longer they're allowed to behave that way, the more and more that behavior will become the culture, at least in that part of the organization.
Yep.
And even worse is if that person who behaves that way is celebrated or recognized or promoted or
Yeah.
given more latitude. And that's not uncommon, because it's also not uncommon to have somebody who's culturally misaligned. They might be technically a rock star.
Yep.
They might be crushing production. They might, and it's hard to address that. But the behaviors you want, if we continue to allow people to act in ways that are counter to that, then everybody else is just going to assume that's the behavior that's tolerated, if not actually expected.
Yeah. So before you keep going,
Please.
so we always talk about that side of it, which is important, right? That's the potential negative side of not living to your core values, right? Um, where I like to present this is the flip side of that. Like,
Yeah.
imagine if you had, if you have 30 people on your team, if 29 of those people are, they would run through the brick wall for your core values and the company and everything you do, and they're not going to tolerate anybody that is not living those out. And you get that one other person who's, comes to work every day. It just is the typical employee that doesn't believe in it, and all those things.
Right.
Because we're not going to hear all those things as leaders, right? Like you mentioned, we hear about it after it's been going on for 2 months, and starts to degrade that. Well, what if you've got that army of people that aren't going to tolerate that and are going to say, hey, if you've got the issue, you need to talk to you need to talk to Chris. We know how Chris is going to, react. He's not going to bite your head off. I've had to go to him with these things before. And, they can coach almost that employee through it to where either they're going to come to you, or, you're going to figure it out, or they're going to figure it out. And you're going to have that misalignment conversation, which I think is much more valuable, or
Yes. Yeah.
just as important to the firm. And, having that overwhelming response to your core values from your team that, you don't even a lot of times have to be the one that's driving that, right? Because there's so many people that live it out every day.
I think that's the spot where you want your organization to be, as to what you talk about, where the
Yeah.
culture is so strong and so pervasive and so clear.
Which is not
And
easy to get to, but that's
no,
what
it's
we all
not,
strive for.
but it rarely happens accidentally. So somebody might not be doing these steps and the words you and I are talking about, but they are doing these things. They're
Yes.
crystal clear. They act that way. They celebrate people who are aligned. That's a part where I think we should spend more time. Is you can influence behavior in a group of people by acknowledging and celebrating and recognizing desired behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
It's the carrot or the stick kind of thing, right? And just if people start to see the rest of their peer group being celebrated, they're going to naturally want to do the kind of things that gets them recognized. And then people will feel empowered to go and to fight for,
Yeah.
fight capital F, lowercase f, whatever, for the things that matter. Because to your point, they'll walk through they'll run through the propeller blades. They'll walk right off a
Yeah.
cliff with a leader. More so, they'll climb the hill, right? Because that's really
Yeah.
where an organization like that is going.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a
and they'll address it themselves.
100% agree.
But
Yeah.
it's tough. I mean, these things seem really simple in a 20-minute conversation. And I think, you and I both as leaders and people who have worked through these things, and I'm assuming almost everybody listening to this has experienced good and bad culture from both sides of the
Oh yeah.
coin, either as a leader or with a peer group, or maybe even somebody they reported to wasn't as aligned on the culture that they thought too. And that's why there's so much work in the change management realm
Mhm.
around kind of working through all the functional areas and this really crisp point around in change management models of knowing who an individual's immediate leader is and really focusing change management efforts in there, because most people want to hear about change and about what's going on in an organization, and they'll take their cues
Yeah.
from their immediate leader.
Totally.
And you get one leader who doesn't buy into a strategy change. And that means everybody in their org is going to be at least behind the curve
Hmm.
coming along. But they can also, with the right tools and resources, help come along. So it's a powerful thing. It takes a lot of work. And I think this notion of let's put flat screens up, let's be transparent on numbers. I mean, let's have like a fun environment, and let's leave at 2 o'clock to have team building. Those things are really, really great tactical ways of bringing a desired
Tactics.
culture to lives, but they're tactics.
Yeah.
None of them are culture by themselves. So flat screens and whiteboards where everybody's goals and results are published, those don't work unless transparency really, really is. And then there's recognition and there's coaching. And there's other things that kind of align behind that.
Yeah.
You and I've
I
seen it, right? You see healthy
100%.
organizations, like this stuff it just kind of works with effort.
Absolutely. Well, and all those tactics, I mean, again, as you mentioned, those are all good. What I always encourage people to ask is the why behind it, right? Like,
Yep.
there's plenty of things we could do. What are we trying to drive? Where are we trying to get to? Why are we trying to do it? Ask those types of questions, and then say, what are the tactics? What are the things that allow us to get to? Because we always joke around about, the ping pong tables and the beer taps and the happy hours and the whatever, but there's nothing wrong with those things, as you mentioned, if you are using them to drive the right thing. So if you really want to drive, the feeling of a community and individual relationships and things like that with your team, a great way to do that is have a happy hour once a month or once a week or whatever you want to do. That could be one tactic you use for the why of creating community within your four walls, right? Um, think about it that way, and then there's many ways to skin that cat about how do we generate community in the four walls, right? But getting thoughtful about those things that you're trying to drive and the feeling you want your people to have is incredibly important. And then the thing that I always find, or I've had to learn this over time, right, as leaders and as business owners, and in particularly our industry, we're entrepreneurs. Like, you want you're trained to move fast. You're type A. You want to get it done and move on to the next things. I got another thing on my plate. This is not something when you're talking about culture, building the type of organization you want, coaching your people. Those are not quick things, right? And
That's a
so
great point. Yeah.
you have to create the right structure that you can live in every day, and that you can take the time reiterating and find as many ways as you mentioned to highlight people for doing the right things and just keep that conversation moving. And it's going to take forever, but you'll see it. You'll start to see people use language that you want. You'll start to see people, like you mentioned, highlighting somebody for doing a core value or something like that. But that's the biggest thing. One of the biggest things I've had to learn is that particular piece is going to take time to build, and you need to be patient, and you need to be very diligent in continuing to drive that culture in your people
Yeah.
that you want.
I really love that. And I guess I hadn't put as much thought into that myself. So I think that's a great point of clarity. The people leading organizations are typically
Oh yeah.
visionary, highly strategic, looking for new opportunities along the way. And again, depending on the size of the organization and the team you built, the folks on the front line are, I think, broad brush, but generally more inclined to stability,
Yep.
wanting to have consistent processes and all those kind of things that go. And so most of them are willing to do something different, but they don't get it the way you do.
Yep.
They don't immediately see how this is a benefit or understand the why. And so being able to be very intentional about connecting those dots and thinking through pace and how you're going to work through managing that change to that. And I think that's an interesting point. One of the things I scribbled down is, you and I are having this conversation 2/3 of the way across the country from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the questions and one of the conversations that happens a lot in the industry is we talk a lot about culture, and you referenced inside these four walls. Well, now thinking about those four walls as being
Oh,
organizations where nobody's inside the same
yeah.
walls, or there's a hybrid, which is
Yeah.
more common than not. And kind
It's
of
another
there's
complexity.
a little bit as a smart, smart aleck, I will say it's the same crap. You still got
Yeah.
to define it. You still got to bake it in. However, not many years ago, but a number of years ago, when I moved into a role in leadership on the carrier side where I had remote employees to work with, I had a mentor pull me aside and say, the one thing I will leave you with on this is your remote employees, whether they know it or not, they need to hear something 3 or 4 more times, if not more,
Yeah.
than folks that are in the home office or in the four walls.
They don't have the
Sometimes
water
having
cooler
people,
conversations and yeah.
yeah, we always look at the meeting after the meeting or the
Yep.
hallway
Yep.
chatter as having a negative connotation. But imagine leaving a staff meeting and then just walking to lunch with your folks, like, oh, what'd you hear? What'd you think of that? Yeah, it's pretty
Yes.
cool. Those kind of things sort of affirm and they bake messaging. But you have staff that might just hang up the Zoom call and then they're on to the next thing. They're not thinking
Yeah.
about it. And so being more intentional about that and creating an environment, an open office scenario, or sort of like something along the way with Zoom or Teams or whatever your platform is. Another thing too, like organizations that try happy hours. If you've got remote employees, okay, the 5
Yep.
people that are in the building get to have pizza ordered in and maybe open up some adult beverages at 4:30 while your remote staff's like, well, that's great.
Yeah.
So I had a colleague in my former life, had a leadership team where most everybody could be in the home office. This person lived multiple states away. And for a few years before the pandemic, he was 100% on Teams or WebEx while we were in a room.
Yep.
And he continually would talk about, I can hear people typing and the chatter, blah, 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 blah. And then with COVID and everybody became the
Mm-hmm.
same square on the screen, his take was he'd never felt more a part of the team
Oh
because
yeah.
now we all had the same experience. And then when it started to go back again, he started to see this sort of separation and how he felt connected to the team. So
Interesting. Yeah.
there's not a magic formula there other than if you're leading a team where not everybody is in the room, think about repeat it, especially if you're an ideator and you're a strategist and you're looking for shiny objects. Well, you really got to spend some time and intention making sure your remote team is on board and extra time with the remote team compared to those that are in the room.
Yeah. Totally. Well, it's like different tactics, right? And
Yeah, totally.
but it's being intentional about what you're trying to drive. And I think, it's back to that comment about entrepreneurs and whatnot. This is something that you can't delegate, which is why I think it's so, I don't want to say difficult, but it can be hard to shift that perspective because you can delegate a lot of things. You have folks that run operations, you have folks that might run sales or whatever that, you think up the next thing and you're strategizing about where to go and you want to implement this. Okay, that makes sense. Go. This culture, values, what you want the organization to be is not something that you can delegate because it's behavior based, as you mentioned. And so if you have the words on paper, but then somebody sees you not living out those words, it just degrades that message more and that trust in what you're putting out there more than anything. So
Well, that's
something that
interesting.
everybody should be thinking about. Go ahead.
Just a final thought on that, right? I mean, I think this is intuitive, but it's worth saying that if we talked about what you permit, you allow kind of thing, and that
Mm-hmm.
might have a connotation of, peer to peer or sort of in the employee base as in general. But if the senior most people in the organization don't behave
Mm,
aligned with the words that they're saying, and right, and so you get a medium-sized agency where the owner says, here's our culture and here's what I expect of you, and then they don't behave that way,
yeah.
then I mean, it doesn't take long at all before people just go like, that person's full of it. They don't even,
Well,
you know, they
yeah.
don't even believe their own story. And so those are out there, and
Totally.
it's not
100%.
like these are bad people. They're not, most of them, right? And it's
Yeah.
just that this is hard work. And a lot of people, and I think this is the separation back to the entrepreneurial thing, is um, nobody will care about your business more than you, but you can make your team care a lot more about your business than you think they
Yeah.
might be able
That's
to with some work.
a great way to put it. Yeah, for sure. So, I don't want to cut that off short, but I would be remiss if I didn't have you talk a little bit about the book. I see it's in the background there if anybody's on video.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I talk a little bit about, your thoughts around writing the book, The Inertia of Legacy, and without giving away the book, but kind of what were you intending? What are you trying to get across to people with the book, and how do you, hope it impacts folks?
Well, okay, so I'll try to be super condensed, which is never a strength of mine.
That's all right.
I've got the need for brevity as a permanent placeholder on my employee development plan and personal
Yeah.
coaching plan. But um, I've been sort of a science junkie off and on throughout my life, and unfortunately ran out of mathematics horsepower. I probably would have gone into the engineering or physics field or something along those lines. But um, I started to re-immerse myself in the science content a number of years ago as podcasts became more and more
Hmm.
prevalent. Things I read and those kind of things, and losing track of specific years, but let's say 5 or 6 years ago, I had this idea that some scientific principles, whether it's astronomy or physics or math, whatever it is, thermodynamics is another one I'm thinking about.
Hmm.
If we explore those through like kind of a layperson's level, there are things we can translate out of that and maybe deploy in our personal or professional lives, because these are just fundamental laws of the way the universe is constructed. And so is there some sort of human dynamic to that? And so I still have a notebook of, I don't know, 8, 9, 7, something like that of those. Um, Somewhere along the line, 4 or 5 years ago, it hit me kind of between the eyes that our industry had procured the word legacy and start to put a negative connotation to that, right? The software world has for a while. And when we hear legacy software, we don't think it's the most sophisticated, current,
Yep.
relevant, dynamic things.
Yeah.
And then,
Legacy insurance agency, right? Yeah.
yeah, well, that's exactly right. And so we say
Yeah.
legacy agency, legacy carrier,
Yep.
legacy team, whatever.
Mhm.
I don't think we intend to necessarily be disparaging, but the connotation there is usually high tenure,
Yeah.
sort of stable in who they are, not necessarily thinking about innovation and how to reinvent themselves. And I had an agent once say that to me, don't call me a legacy agency.
Hmm.
And so we had this conversation. And so, okay, whatever. I tried to stop using it. I fail every day because it's impossible. But I was casually reading or listening to something about Newton's laws of motion, and this idea of inertia came up. And like, well, if something's at rest or if something's in motion, it will stay in that state unless we do something about it or it's impacted by an external force. So if I didn't care for the way our industry was thinking about legacy, I could stop saying legacy, right? And then it got me thinking more and more about how could these Newton's laws and this concept of legacy
Hmm.
really come together. And I really started to think about it then beyond even just what our industry is, and how do us as individuals, us as employees, us as family members, community members, or as business owners think about our own legacy. And as I really got into this, it's not a negative thing, because everywhere else, really universally, this idea of a legacy has this transcendent concept of it's something you build and you manage and you leave behind, not just the wealthiest people in the world, the Steve Jobs or the Bill Gates, but every single living human being and every business that ever exists is leaving a legacy of some kind.
Yep.
So I started to brainstorm and write notes and jot things down. And for a number of years inside this window, maybe 2 or 3, I started to get really clear on how I thought inertia, Newton's laws of motions could be embraced and deployed into how we might think about legacy. But I didn't really know how to articulate it in a way that I felt what was bouncing around in my noggin would make sense to anybody.
Yeah.
And so literally in November, the Thanksgiving weekend of 2022, I just said to heck with it, and opened up my laptop and started writing. And somewhere along the way, I don't know, probably 20 hours or so in the writing, another sciencey thing hit me, and I realized all I'm really thinking about here at the core are two single variables. And math and science has a very powerful way of thinking about two variables, and it's an XY axis. And so, okay, let me start sketching that out. And then I realized that if I plotted the overall amount of effort or energy somebody deploys into managing and defining their legacy and the overall health or clarity of one's legacy, you end up with 4 very distinct quadrants that now became really the bulk of the book, to understand how those intersect each other. And so the idea then is working somebody through to find out where they are on this quadrant. And in each of the there's a chapter for each of the quadrants after the setup where I go through every chapter the exact same way. So when you think about this intersection, what's it like to live or be in business in this? What do we mean by legacy and inertia in each of these things, each of these quadrants? Then I do my darndest to anonymize the scenarios, but I give a real life example from my personal life, a business and a person that I've interacted with or know of that's in that quadrant. And then we have some calls to action.
Yeah.
So it creates this spot to understand where you might be if you're objective, and then to understand what it might be like to live in some of these other quadrants. And then I built this framework that would be like a change tool. How do you plot yourself? How do you figure where you want to be? And how do you start to manage, which becomes kind of like an inertia of legacy business plan, if you will. But the idea is that if you believe that everybody's leaving a legacy, and you sort of align around the fact that a legacy is the sum of your life's work, is there anything more meaningful to any of us than our legacy? And so if you subscribe to those things, why do so people put so much effort? Why do so few people put effort into defining and managing their legacy?
Yeah. So true. Well, probably because they don't have a model in which to think about it.
Well, hopefully they do, right?
I mean, I'll be frank. I think people think about my legacy is after I die, what are people going to think about me, or whatever, which, I know that you're putting words around that, but
yeah,
it's much more than that, and being intentional about it. And ultimately, I think most of us want to feel like we've had a positive impact on the world, right? And that's what legacy is. But it also happens every day, right? And you can work on it every day, and
well,
work
that's the
on
thing,
creating
right?
that
If
legacy you want.
it's something that you've left after you've passed away, of course, maybe you don't care at that point in
Yeah.
time, but then why wouldn't you work on what you want that to be while you're alive,
Yeah.
instead of making it this passive, this passive thing? And so, um, it, I don't know, there's some liberties taken in the book with some of these concepts, but this just idea is that if define what you want to be and what you want to be thought of and what you would want to be remembered as,
Yeah.
and do something about that. And it's not easy, because if you think about the world and kind of using this inertia thing, there are always factors at play that are going to be potential in knocking you off course. And so you can apply force, but you can't apply force to something unless you know what you want it to do. Otherwise, you're just knocking crap off the table.
Yeah.
So even if you're in the healthiest quadrant, which is a defined and intentional legacy and a lot of effort, you have to maintain that level of effort and energy, because there's always other external forces, right? There's weather conditions and market conditions, and some competitor could drop office right across the street from you. Your best employee could leave. I mean, those are the, kind of things that if you're really focused on that, then you have greater stability so that you can sort of fend those things off.
Yeah.
I closed the book with a goofy analogy on the gyroscope that many people had and there's usually one of them. And it's about finding your intention and putting your effort in to really fulfilling your intention. So to me, a gyroscope, that's why it's the logo on the book and it's the logo of different things to do with that, is that sitting on a shelf, a gyroscope is essentially useless. It's quirky. It's kind of awkward. It doesn't even really serve as much more than a paperweight. But that's not what it was built for. It was built to provide stability to some of the most sophisticated devices that humankind has ever built, right? But what makes something that's clunky and awkward and very unstable become one of the most sophisticated navigation and balance devices ever devised is really intentional energy.
Yep.
And once you get that gyroscope spinning, which is exactly what it's designed to do, now it's remarkably stable. And if you kind of, you've played with one, right? You push it, like, not only does it like not fall off the table, but you can feel the energy pushing back. And so it's a really powerful analogy for like, all right, well, figure out why you're here in the first place or why you want to be here, and then align your energy to making that happen. And if you're really focused there, things are more stable and you're better equipped to sort of fend off outside forces.
Totally agree.
So I've gotten
totally agree. Well, that's awesome. I mean, yeah.
Sorry for rambling on that.
No, not at all. I wanted everybody to kind of get an idea. Where can they get a copy of the book if they want to read it?
It's Amazon in all formats, paperback, hardback. You can get Audible, and Kindle, and it's also on Apple Books.
Perfect.
For now.
Awesome.
And if we get it big enough, then it'll be in all bookstores. But
there you go.
Right now, Amazon's the way.
Well, that's the biggest bookstore. So
it really is. Yeah.
And then if people want to get a hold of you, about anything that we talked about today, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, love to talk culture, love to talk about the book, but my day gig is trying to help agencies figure out technology and how the industry can rally around it. And so, check out me. I'm on LinkedIn and I love to interact with people on LinkedIn. I probably am overly active out there, but ACT has a LinkedIn page. We have a website. I know we'd love to talk to you about what we do. And if you're listening from an organization out there that's looking for something that's kind of neutral in the middle of the industry that's trying to make good things happen, we'd love to talk about ways we could partner as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, I enjoyed it. Thank you for the time. I think everybody out there, we've given them a lot to think about. So I appreciate it. And
do something. Do something.
Yeah.
With everything you consume, right? Make an intentional decision that you took nothing away from it. Or if you did, do something different tomorrow. Otherwise, it was just 45 minutes of time that you'll never get your click back. And you don't want that to be the case. Neither do I.
That's a great closing right there. Well, thank you, Chris. And we'll be talking soon.
Appreciate it.